I will teach you how to play the Stonewall attack, which can lead to crazy aggressive positions like the one you are seeing right now, where white can get an early game win. So we're going to take a look at the Stonewall attack, the main ideas, the attacking plans, and I will also show you a novelty, a new move that hasn't been played before and fixes the main weakness of the Stonewall defense. So we are going to get started here with talking about the key IDs and the attacking plans. So the Stonewall starts off with the move d4 by white. We are going to first look at some variations where black plays knight f6 and also pawn to d5. So we are going to continue with e3, d5 and then bishop to d3, and those are usually the first three moves you are going to play in the Stonewall attack. In the future, you often want to put your knight here, and we also want to put this pawn on f4. And it depends a little bit on the black setup, but most of the time you can do pretty much the same thing anyways. And I will show you the best variation that doesn't lead to any problems if black plays all of the most optimal moves. If you enjoy playing openings like this, I would also recommend you take a look at the Pegasus system, which is a chess book that I wrote, a new chess opening, which is also a d4 opening with an early knight to d2, so you can check that out if you are interested, because it's pretty similar to the Stonewall, except it actually doesn't have some of the weaknesses that the Stonewall does have. So here, we are going to continue with e6 for black. In many variations, black will actually wait a little bit with playing e6 and probably play the bishop out at some point. We are going to take a look at that a little bit later. Here we are going to continue with pawn to e6, which is what most beginner and online players are going to play if they didn't study your opening. So here we can already play our pawn to f4. And we do this, of course, because we want to develop the knight, but we want to move the pawn first, because of course if we move the knight, the pawn is stuck and we can't move it. Black will usually attack you at some point with a move pawn to c5, whatever variation of the Stonewall you are playing. Whenever that happens, we always play pawn to c3. And that makes it so that if black ever takes, well, you can actually take both ways, but I usually like capturing with the e-pawn, so we still have a really solid structure and our pieces are still here aiming at the enemy king side, and also this pawn can sometimes be used to continue with the attack as well. Now, normally black is not going to capture early on. They will probably play something like knight c6 to develop, build up a little bit of pressure, so we can play knight to f3. Black will develop the bishop, sometimes e7, sometimes d6. It honestly doesn't really matter where they put it. Yeah, it's pretty much the same. I think d6 is a little bit better for black, but there's not really that much of a difference. Here as white, there are multiple things we are going to do. It's usually important to play your knight to d2. You can also castle. You can pretty much do both of those things. The only thing with castling is that sometimes black can try to put their knight here in the center. And if you play knight to d2 straight away, of course, yeah, this is no longer possible, because this would just be losing a pawn for black. So that is why I think in this specific line it's better to go with the knight first. Although it's usually also not really a problem if black ever puts the knight here. So black is going to castle, we are going to castle, and then the main benefit of playing this opening, the Stonewall attack, is that black doesn't have that many plans. If you look at this position for black, there's not much black can do. Because of course, if they ever take in the center, well, here for example, it's best to take with the c-pawn, but you can also take with the e-pawn, doesn't matter too much. But if they ever take, we just have a solid center. There is never anything happening on the king side, and even on the queen side, there's not much going on. So the only real plan for black is usually to play pawn to b6, bishop to b7, and then again, black is going to be stuck without a real plan. The plan for white is pretty easy. We are going to go for the kill. We are going to go for a quick attack on the enemy king. So we will play something like knight to e5, centralizing our knight. And then now this diagonal has also been opened up. This knight might in the future come here. This bishop is already aiming at h7. So you can start to see some potential attacking plans for white already. We are also attacking this knight, and of course capturing this is instantly losing because of this fork, attacking two pieces at the same time. Sacrificing the bishop is also usually pretty bad, because we can take back like this, we have a beautiful center, and also this knight, which was a key defender here of this pawn on h7, has already been removed. So we can even go for some quick attacks, for example this, and even if they block us, you can already see if we remaneuver with the knight, we try to go for a checkmate here on h7. It's not so easy for black to stop all of these plans. So usually black will just play something like bishop to b7, and the position you see right now is one of the most common ones, especially online, when playing the Stonewall attack. So how are we going to continue here for white? Well, actually there are three ways to continue. There is queen f3, rook f3, and pawn to g4. And I think all of those moves are worth looking at, are worth studying, because they can be played. I personally recommend to go in with queen to f3 first, and then later on the pawn to g4, and we will only use the rook once the other pieces are already in attacking positions. That is just what I recommend. You can study different variations as well, but this is one of the best ones, I think. And again, if you look at this for black, it's not super clear what is black gonna do. I mean, yeah, there's not much going on. So we're going to take a look at a couple of lines. Of course, again, if they ever take here, I would actually capture now with the e-pawn. Not really a problem. We are going to continue with this move, knight to e7, which is one of the most common moves by black. So white, pretty straightforward. We are going to go for the kill. We will play pawn to g4. We want to kick away this knight. And then if we remove this knight, we suddenly have even more attacking opportunities here against h7. And yeah, many things can happen. We are going to take a look at a couple of lines. First of all, sometimes knight to g6 is played because black realizes there are some issues on the king side. They want to get more pieces there. You can easily win against this. For example, pawn to g5. This knight now has to go. Queen to h5. We are going to play aggressive attacking moves. And if you want to play the Stonewall, it's important to just study attacking chess and always play aggressive moves, because your opponent can always deviate, play different moves that I didn't show you or that you didn't study, and you still have to know what to do in those lines. So for example here, if the knight takes, we can recapture, the bishop has to go, and you can see we still have some pressure. And you might be thinking in a position like this that, well, black was actually able to defend, because there's not really an immediate threat from white to win anything here. Well, actually there is, but it's a bit higher level, and that is to play rook to f3, and we are just simply going to swing over the rook. And you notice in this line, this pawn on h7 is very weak. So for example, yeah, actually it doesn't matter. If I just play any random move for black, we are just gonna get this, and that's pretty much game over. There's nothing black can do. And of course, if they play pawn to h6, we can just take, and yeah, taking here with the queen is good. Taking here with the bishop is good. Even activating the rook is good. Like, you can't really mess up anymore once you play this type of position. I'm just going to show you one line, for example this, check, check, check with the rook, and this is also a checkmate. So pretty easy to get an early game win here in these positions. Again, this is the position we looked at before, but now let's say we play g4, and black doesn't go for this this knight to g6. Black, for example, just moves the knight because they realize we are already in trouble. I'm just going to move the knight now, and then I don't have to move it on the next move. That's possible. Also h6 is possible, but most of these lines are pretty similar. So we are just going to swing the queen over. So actually we move the queen to f3, but on f3 it's not really doing that much. The main goal was to just move the queen again. So we already have our first checkmate threat. Black has to stop this, for example with pawn to g6, and we can just play queen to h6. And now again, we are in some variations trying to go for a checkmate here on h7. Sometimes you can also just sack a bunch of pieces here on g6, or you can even activate this knight and go to g5 as well to go for a checkmate. And here black can choose what to do. If black plays pawn to f6, which is very common, trying to kick away the knight, we can even sack, take with the bishop. That's of course a checkmate threat. And if black captures with the knight, it's check. And now we just play rook to f3, and yeah, there's nothing that can happen for black. For example, if I play the queen here, check, and then of course this is checkmate, or taking with the queen is also checkmate. So those are the main ideas for the Stonewall attack. Now I will show you my novelty and also the top grandmaster lines. So if you want to play this, just try to remember the key ideas that I showed you. The first moves are important, that you play them in the right order. You want to go for that setup, and then you just want to attack. And there are different lines that I won't be able to show you, but you just have to try and attack. Do everything you can to activate your pieces and attack the enemy king. Now we will take a look at the grandmaster top played line. So that is, if we play this Stonewall attack structure, what the grandmasters like to do is to play pawn to c5 very early on. And you might be thinking, well, can I just capture this? Yeah, you can, but things get very complicated quickly. For example, this, everything gets very complicated. I'm not going to go into that. But if you want to continue with the Stonewall structure, that's still possible. Because we were attacked, we are of course going to play pawn to c3. We already talked about that. Black is going to develop the knight, and we are going to play f4 early on, which is very key because we always want to stop this e5 push. I know many players and even other YouTubers often talk about how important it is to always move the knight out early on. I actually disagree with that in the Stonewall, because sometimes if you move the knight out early on, you suddenly get hit with something like e5, and then you get positions like this and everything just crumbles. I actually think it's more important to play f4 early on, because now we do have two pawns together working together to stop this push to e5 by black. So black has to continue, and of course we and the previous variation took a look at those very close positions for black with the pawn on e6, but it's actually better for black to come out with the bishop, and that's also something people sometimes don't talk about, just because this is not so pleasant always for white, and for years people have struggled how to play against this setup with the Stonewall. So I want to show you a new way of doing things. Of course, our queen is under attack, so we're going to block just with the knight, also developing the knight, everything is fine. Black plays probably pawn to e6, the most played move, white castles, and black plays bishop to d6. So this position that we see here is how all grandmasters and really high rated players try to fight back against the Stonewall attack. This is something that people sometimes don't like to talk about, because this is one of the weaknesses actually of the Stonewall attack, and that is this position. And it's sometimes hard to understand why this is a weakness, because things look normal, but in general black just has a better position, better center, more developed pieces, less weaknesses, and black has some nice plans, and white is sometimes a bit struggling in these lines. But I was able to find something you can try in your games. And we are going to start off with queen to e1. And queen to e1 in and by itself, it's not a new move. This has been played before. And this database that I'm looking at right now, this has been played 7 times by grandmasters, but probably it has been played even more. So this is the first move in our plan. And that is of course because we want to unpin the knight. We want to unpin the knight, and we also want to free up the queen. So now we have a chance to move our knight in the future. Of course, if black ever captures you right here, or even, let's say, after we castle, if black captures you early on, usually you just recapture with the queen, and this is pretty similar to everything we have seen. If they play this, there's not really a problem. The annoying part comes when black doesn't capture your knight, and they just keep the pin and they keep the pressure. So my recommendation is move the queen out first. It's black to move, most likely they are gonna castle, makes the most sense. And then, of course, they can still capture, but then here we are going to capture with the rook. I don't want to capture with the pawn and ruin the structure, we're just going to capture with the rook, so that's also fine. But they are probably going to castle, and then now comes the new move that actually hasn't been played before, and that is knight to h4. And knight to h4 might look confusing at first, like why would you move your knight to the rim? There's not really any goal here. Well, the goal is that in many of these lines we want to play h3, but then this bishop can always move back, and if the bishop moves to f5, usually as white you are in trouble, because even if you capture this, all of a sudden this opens up and our weakest pawn, this pawn on e3, can become a target of attack. And the really high level idea with playing the knight to h4 is that we are attacking this f5 square, so that in the future we play this move pawn to h3, the bishop will have to move, but there won't be any opportunity to move to f5 because we already are covering that square twice. And since this variation has never been played, nobody will really know what to do against this either, so they will have to figure things out over the board. Multiple lines are possible for black. I am just going to continue here with queen to e7, for example. And then we are also going to cover what to do if they play knight to e4. So queen to e7. What are we going to do here? Well, just quite simply, h3. And of course, I just told you that this is no longer possible because, well, they lose a pawn, and then also we get our knight placed here. We can play g4, we can go for the attack. So that's not really possible. So the black bishop is a little bit stuck here. They have to go to h5, but of course we can play pawn to g5, g4 of course, attacking. The bishop has to move again, and then we can eliminate it with the knight. So all of a sudden we were able to eliminate their most annoying piece with our knight, which was pinned, and that is the entire goal here. Go for a position like this, and this is already far more pleasant to play with white than all of the other options you will see and that some people recommend, because here we got rid of their best piece. We also damaged their structure. We gained a lot of space here. We didn't damage any of our own structure. We didn't cause any problems. We just have simple moves. For example, knight to d2. Let's say they attack. We can always stop that with a4. And if you look at this now for black, there are just no plans for black. There is nothing that black can try here. Black just can move his pieces around. And as white, we are going to slowly but surely make sure to improve our pieces. So for example, going with the knight to g5, now we can develop the bishop, we can improve the queen a little bit, and then at some point maybe we can even push with e4 in the center, go for something like this, and you can already see the position for white is starting to look better and better with every single move, opening up towards the enemy king, while for black it doesn't really look that pleasant. So this is my recommendation against the top line for black, and this way you can still get a good position. There are 3 more things we need to cover, so I will cover those quickly as well. The first is, what if black goes for a really early knight to c6, which is sometimes something that especially beginners like to do, going for this early knight to c6 with the idea of playing knight to b4 and attacking your bishop. This is fine. I honestly think against this you can still go for the Stonewall structure with pawn to f4. And of course, if they play the bishop to g4, we can just play knight to f3, pawn e6, and then you can play c3 to make sure that the knight can no longer get here. For example, this, and of course this is pretty similar to what we have seen before, except for the fact that the pawn is blocked by its own knight. So this is worse for black than what we have seen. It's also possible, of course, for black to just go after your bishop. And if this happens, my recommendation is that you just accept this. You just play knight to f3, they can take, we recapture with the pawn, because now of course we have a really solid center, and also we can stop this knight from coming in, which can sometimes be a problem, but here we can stop that. So you can just play normal moves, you can castle, you can develop the knight. Everything is pretty similar to what we have seen, but the biggest difference is we no longer have our bishop, and we just have this pawn here on d3. We can move the queen again. You might be thinking, why are we moving the queen? But yeah, of course, we want to unpin the knight. We don't want to stay in this pin, so that we can play pawn to h3. Yeah, if they take, you just recapture with the knight. And if they move, you can either go here. You can also play pawn to g4. So it's a pretty pleasant position to play for white. Multiple IDs. I think even g4 is fun as well, going for this and then going after that bishop. You can also put this knight here, put this knight in the center. It's pretty fun to play from the white side. Yeah, I think sometimes black can also still go for a counter attack, but there's not really any problem. I even think it's funny to just capture this. It removes their bishop, and the bishop here is not really doing anything because the pawn is pinned. You could be thinking, I'm gonna play this, but actually that also creates a weakness in your camp. So I recommend keeping the pawns like this if you ever face this. And then just going for something like g4, developing the knight, maybe taking this in the future, this, a3, b4. Really pleasant for white, so you won't have any issues here. Next up, really quickly, is what to do if black goes for a really early bishop g4, which is possible. I also talk about this in the Pegasus system and also in the video course on the Pegasus system, because those positions are very similar to this. If, of course, black goes for the bishop g4 line. The best thing always to do there is pawn to f3. The bishop's got to go, and then you can develop your knight here, and you can play an early c4 and castle. And I won't deviate too much on this, but as I said, if you want to learn more, I think this is covered well in one of the earlier chapters, the Capablanca variation of the Pegasus system book and opening course. And then the next thing we are going to look at, that's the final variation, that is what if black goes for a modern type defense. So what I mean by that is more so a fianchetto by the black bishop. So for example this, and then black plays pawn to g6, which of course some players like to do. This is perfectly fine. They are going to put their bishop here on g6. So you can still continue with the Stonewall, not really any issues. You can just play regular moves and also castle and get a position like this. And usually these lines are very similar in some ways to what we have talked about before regarding the key IDs. The only thing is that this c5 push for black is actually not really that good anymore because it's not so easy. Since the bishop is no longer supporting it, the c5 push becomes more difficult. And white just has the same plans we have talked about before. Sometimes black can try to force things with a knight d7 because this can support a c5 push. We can always attack the bishop, and even the bishop here is a little bit stuck because it can't really retreat anywhere. It can't go to h5, otherwise it will be lost. So probably they have to trade it. You can take with the knight or with the queen, but I like taking with the queen and still keeping the knight here for a potential push of c4 and also for protection of the center as well. If black plays c5, you can play c3. We have seen this before. If black ever pushes, not really a problem. You can always just throw back. That is the same rule in every variation. You can always just throw back with the bishop. And then even sometimes b3 is possible, and you already have two pieces here protecting that. So that's also fine. Black can try to go for a queenside attack, but it doesn't really matter. And white can still go for the kingside attack with pawn to g4, sometimes pawn to h5, h4, h5. Just keep pushing, keep attacking the enemy king. That's also still the same plan in this variation. For example, e6, g5, knight goes back, h4. And it's pretty pleasant to play from white. You can try and destroy the enemy king. If it doesn't work, if black plays really well defensively, you can still try to break things open on the queen side as well. So that is it for the Stonewall attack. If you enjoyed this, definitely subscribe to the channel. And as always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.